Let me say something about Jamie's background. He's had an extremely prominent role in the overall inscription of the Lake District as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which was announced in 2017. He has a senior role as a deputy chair of the World Heritage Site Technical Advisory Group, which advises the Lake District Partnership on how to sustain the outstanding universal value that is unique to the Lake District. And I'm sure he'll talk about that during his presentation. He started his career in 1998, 23 years ago, with the National Trust, becoming their survey archaeologist. And between 1998 and 2002, he conducted a number of surveys of National Trust properties in Hawkshead, Coniston, and Hartsop. He's now a senior advisor with the National Trust. And when he's not at work, he spends his time with his wife and his daughters on the lakes and fells, a keen mountain bike rider, and coaches the under-12s girls football team in the South Lakes Girls League. Jamie, you are extremely welcome. Thank you so much for giving your time tonight. Pass the floor to you.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Anne, and thank you all for joining us tonight. It's lovely to see you. I can only see a handful of you on screen, but I know there's many more of you. Welcome to my conservatory. It's lovely to invite you into my conservatory, which has been my place of work since the first lockdown. So I've been working either in the freezing cold or in the scorching sun since March of last year. I really must sort out another corner of the house at some point. At some point, my wife and girls will come back from their mountain bike ride and will come in and make a hell of a noise. I shall turn around and tell them to shut up. So please do bear with me when they do. I'm more than happy to have questions during the talk if there's something that really is fundamental to your understanding before we move on. Otherwise, as Tim said, we can try and bat through, and then I'm more than happy to hang around and answer any questions about the presentation or indeed about the National Trust more broadly. So at this point, we're going to go and see if the technology works. So I shall share my screen, and I shall try and share the right screen with you because I've got two on the go. And that's very convenient because I can now see Tim, but only Tim. And I'm going to ask him to give me a thumbs up if he can see my screen and he can still hear me. Right, marvelous.
Okay.
That's super. Well, I do quite enjoy talking about the English Lake District World Heritage Site. It is something that I find really fascinating, and I think arrived at a time in my own career which was just about perfect. I'd been working as a survey archaeologist for the National Trust for 18, 19 years. Had a good grip and an understanding of the cultural heritage of the area, and I've been very lucky and to be well placed to help land the inscription and the World Heritage status successfully in the region. However, World Heritage can sometimes be rather baffling. Let's see if I can move forward. There we go. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to understand. There's a lot of jargon. And what I'm going to try and do tonight in the next 40 minutes or so is really provide you with a beginner's guide, a toolkit to understanding what World Heritage is and what the purpose of World Heritage sites might be. We're going to look at the background World Heritage sites. What do you need to demonstrate? What do you need to have to join this elite club of 1,000 or so special sites across the globe? Often in press releases relating to World Heritage sites, you might hear this phrase, outstanding universal value, being used. So we'll look at that as well. We'll try and work out what it means and how it's being applied to the English Lake District. We'll then talk a little bit about management, and I think that and one or two other places will be where I'll say something about the National Trust, its role as an element of the World Heritage Site, but also as part of the managing partnership. I love using this slide. I had the great privilege in the days when you could travel to present to a conference in San Francisco to a group of heritage professionals, and I used this slide. And it was wonderful because when you're in a room of Americans, you do actually have to tell people where the English Lake District is, and this little arrow guiding people into this corner of Europe is very useful. So I think it's perhaps useful to just highlight where the boundary of the World Heritage Site is. And that's quite easy because it is contiguous with the boundary of the national park established in 1951. There is a direct overlap, correlation between the two. The World Heritage Site does not extend into the two extension areas of the national park in the Tebay Valley and down near Sizer and Helsington. Now, depending on what your feelings are about who should make decisions regarding our heritage, our cultural heritage, our landscapes, you may be happy or less happy to know that there is an international body that is responsible for creating and overseeing the management of World Heritage Sites, and that's called UNESCO, and in particular UNESCO's World Heritage Centre. And they are part of the United Nations, wonderful organization established in that period of optimism following the Second World War, when we decided that we were going to try and use diplomacy rather than military force to get along and solve the world's problems. And UNESCO's stated purpose for its World Heritage Programme and its World Heritage Sites is this: it's to encourage the identification, protection, preservation of cultural and natural heritage around the world, considered to be of outstanding value to humanity. And that gives us a little way in there to this phrase of outstanding universal value that we'll return to in a minute or two. And as that slide makes clear, there are lots of special places around the globe. But the very essence of World Heritage Sites is that their significance is so exceptional that it has universal application, relevance to all peoples, regardless of where they are located around on the globe, future and current generations of people. It's that universality that's important. And this notion of the universal application of World Heritage Sites is really at the root of the convention, the World Heritage Convention, or to give its long handle, the Convention Concerning the Protection of the World's Cultural and Natural Heritage, which was written and adopted in 1972. Now, the UK typically was slow to perhaps pick up on World Heritage. It didn't, while it signed the treaty in 1972, it didn't actually nominate its first World Heritage Site until 1986, and then quickly tried to catch up by nominating 12 in the next couple of years. Since 1972, the number of countries with World Heritage Sites within them, known as state parties, has increased to 193. And the World Heritage Convention, I think it's fair to say, is recognized as the framework for the management and protection of the planet's cultural and natural heritage. It is the gold standard, the elite club. And I think it's definition time, I suppose. There's lots of UNESCO-ese, this particular strange language that people want you to use when you talk about World Heritage Sites. And one of the words is inscription. World Heritage Sites are not made nor are they born, they are inscribed. They're inscribed by UNESCO using their operational guidelines, which are effectively a set of rules about how you can apply, how you are judged, and then what you're responsible to do once you are inscribed. The criteria for inscription changes. It's being changed at the present time to reflect the global situation, or the crisis in nature, the climate crisis, and not only is the technical guidelines being changed and revised at various times, but also there are trends in the types of site that are going to be inscribed. There are huge gaps in terms of African and South American cultural heritage being inscribed, and something of an embarrassment of riches for across Europe. So there's a conscious attempt at the moment to try and represent the globe more fairly. And in order to be inscribed as a World Heritage Site, you have to demonstrate relevance under one or more of 10 UNESCO criteria. They set the criteria and you have to measure up against it. There are 6 cultural criteria. Not going to read them, you'll be glad to know. And 4 criteria to be used when inscribing natural sites. Now, the English Lake District is inscribed using 3 cultural criteria. So it is not inscribed for its biodiversity, its natural landscapes. It is inscribed for its cultural landscape significance and its cultural heritage. And you can get a flavor of the sorts of things that UNESCO regard as being of global significance about the Lake District from the wording of those 3 criteria that were used for our inscription. So at present, there are just a little over 1,100 World Heritage Sites globally, across 167 different jurisdictions in 198 countries. And there are 4 different categories or types of World Heritage Sites. Natural sites, things like the Great Barrier Reef, cultural sites, if you think about the Roman Forum, cultural landscapes. So think less about sites and monuments, but more about whole landscapes. And I'll say a little bit more about those in a moment. And also mixed sites, this sort of strange category, which are inscribed for their mixed natural and their cultural heritage significance. St Kilda is probably an example of a mixed site that you'll be most familiar with. And as you can see here, there is a good scattering of World Heritage Sites across the globe, but certainly a concentration within that European realm there. Green ones there are natural sites, yellow ones are cultural sites, green and yellow mixed are mixed sites, and the red ones are heritage at-risk sites. Now, I think one thing that's really important to understand as we get to grips with the significance of the Lake District is its definition as a World Heritage Cultural Landscape. UNESCO define cultural landscapes as representing the combined works of nature and people, or nature and mankind. They define it as being illustrative of the evolution of human society and settlement across time, under the influence of physical constraints or opportunities presented by their natural environment and of successive social, economic, and cultural forces. You could summarize that to say a cultural landscape is the sum total of the interactions between people and place, society and its environment, the landscapes in which it dwells. But to make things a little bit more complicated, there are actually different types of cultural landscape. And for the sake of brevity, I'll concentrate on the one that applies to the Lake District. We are an organically evolved landscape. an organically evolved landscape is one where it's resulted, it is created by this interaction between socio-economic forces and a natural environment. It's a quintessential relationship between people and place, people and their environment. And critically, we are a continuing cultural landscape. That term refers to the fact that we are not a relic landscape. We haven't ceased to be in the Lake District. The forces that shape it, farming, industry, tourism, are still at work. They're still creating and allowing the landscape to evolve. It is continuing to develop. And it's under those criteria, and with that in mind, that the Lake District was inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 2017. But it wasn't the first. It wasn't the first cultural landscape to be inscribed in the UK. Blaenavon, Wales, is also a cultural landscape on a global scale. If you want to understand the relationship between people, industry, coal mining, and iron smelting, there's perhaps no better place in the world to go to understand that and to see its physical remains than Blaenavon. If you want to understand how metal mining technologies that were developed in Devon and Cornwall were exported across the globe and transformed the planet, then you can see the birth of that industry and those technologies in the Devon and Cornwall mining landscapes. If you want to understand how Britain and London became one of the centres for plant collecting and the exchange of horticultural and silvicultural knowledge from the 17th century onwards, you could do a lot worse than go to Kew Gardens and understand that that place is a remarkable record of that particular piece of human evolution. And other cultural landscapes across the globe go from the sublime, Mount Fuji, major motif in global art, and also the spiritual home of two global religions, Shintoism and Buddhism, go from the sublime to the ridiculous. This is the Fray Bentos canning plant in Uruguay. Without the technologies of canning developed by Fray Bentos, the British Empire and indeed every European empire could never have existed, because we couldn't have sent those soldiers and missionaries off with canned food to keep them going in the deepest, darkest places around the globe. So we are in some interesting company as a cultural landscape. Now, the process of inscription has been around for a little while. There were two unsuccessful attempts to become inscribed as a World Heritage Site in the 1980s. They weren't successful, but UNESCO recognized that there was something really rather special about the Lake District, and they very much wanted the Lake District to join UNESCO, but couldn't quite see a way of making it happen within the criteria. And remarkably, as a consequence of that, they changed their criteria to accommodate sites like the Lake District. They developed the criteria of cultural landscape. But the inscription that led to the process that led to the successful inscription really only got going in 2002, as there was money available within the regional development agencies to help Cumbria recover from the foot and mouth disaster. That process built ahead of steam and led to the creation of a nomination dossier being written and submitted to UNESCO in 2016, setting out the case for inscription. And we were considered by the World Heritage Meeting in Krakow in July of 2017. And there we are. I think the United Kingdom is sat in front of Botswana and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So there we are. That's what a World Heritage Site meeting looks like. And I mentioned the World Heritage Nomination Dossier and Plan. And These documents are an incredible record and document of exactly all of those qualities and significance of the Lake District that propelled us through to a successful inscription. And if you haven't looked at them already, they are available to download freely from the National Park Authority website. And there's a huge amount of information in there that I think you'd find absolutely fascinating. There's a whole chapter on the Ullswater Valley, which is well illustrated with maps and photographs. And I'm sure there'd be useful information for lots of people. Just before I get onto a slightly easier, less technical part of this presentation, there is one thing that I just must define, and that's this strange term of outstanding universal value. What is it? It's certainly something that all World Heritage sites have got to demonstrate. It is, if you want, the currency that World Heritage sites need to demonstrate possession of in order to be inscribed. And UNESCO define outstanding universal value as cultural or natural significance, which is so exceptional that it transcends national boundaries, the global element, and to be of common importance for present, future generations of all humanity, everybody now and everybody in the future. So you can see it's so incredibly high, which is why we've only got a few more than 1,100 sites around the globe. So we really are in an elite club. That should make us all very proud and feel very lucky in the Lake District. And I'm now going to sort of move on from what was a difficult technical description of what World Heritage is, where it comes from, what it means, into drilling down into what I hope is the more interesting part of the specialness of the Lake District, its outstanding universal value. There are three themes, three pillars that hold up the outstanding universal value of the Lake District. The first is this landscape of exceptional beauty, shaped by persistent and distinctive agropastoralism, local industry that gives it its special character. It's the landscape, shaped by farming, shaped by industry. We can all recognize and picture that. The second pillar is that it's inspirational quality for artists and writers and literary movements, and the fact that it's generated ideas about landscapes that have had global influence and left their physical mark. It's about how that landscape has triggered all sorts of artistic and literary movements that have had global significance. And finally, it's about it being a landscape that's been the catalyst for key global developments in international and national protection of landscapes. And supporting those three pillars are 9 attributes. You can see that list there. And below that, 49 components. Oh, what a lot of defining. I'm not going to go through those, you'd be glad to know, but I think it's important to know that what is special about the Lake District has been researched and defined and distilled down to its very essence. And once you can see it, you've then got to find words to describe it. It's so very difficult, but so very important, because unless we can actually communicate what it is that we're trying to hold on to, pass on to future generations, we're going to struggle to do it. I think often themes, components, attributes of outstanding universal value, they don't appear discrete and separate. They're intertwined, they're interlayered and complex. But in the next few minutes, I'm going to sort of try and pull those 3 themes apart and give you a better understanding and insight into those components and those building blocks. So let's dive in. Let's have a look at that first theme of outstanding universal value, this landscape shaped by farming and industry. I think anyone who looks at a landscape like this happens to be Worcester Head. It's quintessentially Lake District. It couldn't be anywhere else, could it? How do we all recognize that as the Lake District? Well, I think it's because of its socio-economic and cultural history. Each valley, each landscape has been shaped by 800, 1,000 years of agropastoralism, whether that be medieval cattle farming, creation of deer parks and hunting, or the management of traditional breeds, Herdwick, Swaleys, and rough fell sheep. There's much of the significance is tied into the physical fabric of the landscape. It's in the regional variation of walling types and the geology, the choice of stone, the field patterns. Again, just so quintessentially Lake District. And that interaction between a unique natural landscape, the geology, the drama, the flat valley bottoms, the high fells. This has not only influenced the type of farming that has developed over the last 800 years, but also the types of flora and fauna. All these wonderful landscape types are, again, quintessentially Lake District, the upland flower meadows, the woodlands, the wood pasture, the montane heathlands and upland heathlands. And dropping back down again to the valley bottom, the vernacular architecture of the Lake District, and particularly the vernacular architecture of, let's say, 1650 onwards, that period of the Great Rebuilding, as it's known, when the Cumbrian yeomanry flushed with their confidence of having had their customary status confirmed by James I, set about rebuilding timber frame buildings in stone to show their confidence, their intention to stay put, and is recognizable in these wonderful vernacular farmhouses. That confidence and distinctiveness, local character is also available, but was also identifiable in the choice of field barns, vernacular buildings, cattle sheds, shippons. And it's in the details. That particular way of living, that interaction between people and place, has resulted in a strange set of quirky vernacular architectural flourishes that are incredibly local and always a product of knowing what works in this particular area. And alongside vernacular buildings, it's also that wonderful Lake District vernacular and quirkiness, the packhorse bridges, the water hex, the shard fences, the bee bowls, all of those peculiarities that you see in the Lake District. All of this is part of that landscape that is so cherished. But it's not all about farming. We talk a lot about farming today. But the Lake District was, until quite recently, a very industrial and active landscape. The main two industries were, of course, slate quarrying and metal mining, and they have left their trace in the landscape. Sometimes those traces are writ large, like Force Crag, which has dominated, changed the head of the Coaldale Valley forever. Otherwise, they sometimes can be very intimate, little narrow Elizabethan coffin levels slipping into the hillside. You'd walk straight past them if you didn't know they were there. And there are other industries besides that have left fantastic legacies. Iron smelting, bobbin milling, gunpowder manufacture. These are all industries that until 1900, 1910 were really still quite active, big employers in the area. And it's the coming together. It's the coming together of farming, industry, and a very distinctive physical landscape, a valley bottoms, lakes, tarns, fells, valley sides, that has produced this wonderful historic landscape, this cultural landscape that can be read like a book if you know how to, if you speak the language. And if you want an insight into that language, again, do go back to the World Heritage Nomination dossier. The maps in there are hugely useful in providing you with a key to reading that cultural landscape and deciphering its meaning. So there we are. We've now got this cultural landscape. What happens to it next is really quite interesting. We're going to look at that in this second theme of outstanding universal value. That landscape we've just seen and how it's inspired artistic and literary movements and generated ideas about landscapes that have had global influence and left their physical mark. It seems strange to be talking about the Lake District and show you a quote from Daniel Defoe that talks about Basingstoke, but it's such an insight, because if you read this, it's remarkable how Defoe, as a tourist, as an early tourist, talks about the spaces in between towns, the unpleasant country, which I often call a desert, and how moving into the parklands and gardens of the nobility and gentry was like moving into a pleasant and fertile country. There was no interest in scenery. There was no interest in travel between places of note. People would go to see ruins, monasteries, castles, baronial seats, but the places in between them didn't really register on the tourist's itinerary. So we kind of lacked an interest in scenery in this country, even into the 18th century. And the other thing that we lacked in the UK was a strong tradition of landscape painting. At the start of the 18th century, paintings like this one, it's just one of many paintings that was produced under the title of The Book of Truth by Claude Lorraine, which was hugely popular amongst the English nobility, was still very popular. And it is such a safe and alien landscape to people in the UK. It's clearly a classical landscape. It's heavily fortified with classical and religious imagery and meaning. It's utterly stylistic and is meant to be read like a code. It's not there to be enjoyed as a landscape. And that's what people were buying. That's what people were importing into this country. Until William Gilpin got going. And humble-born son of Carlisle really changed the landscape world, the landscape portraiture world, by adapting continental styles of painting to the English landscape, English reality. And it was the act of doing that that created the picturesque. An early example of Gilpin's art you can see here. And throughout the 1770s, Gilpin travelled first of all through the Wye Valley, then into Scotland, and then only then ending up in the Lake District, where he began to paint with great enthusiasm the Lake District scenes. And he defined, in doing that, and his other writings defined the principles of a new way of seeing landscape, picturesque. And at the heart of this picturesque movement was really a shift in the way that you were meant to see and enjoy art. It was not objective, it was subjective feel. It was subjective seeing. Portraiture now, landscape portraiture, did not ask the viewer what they knew. There was no code to crack. It was asking them what they felt. How does this landscape make you feel? And this is a view of Crummock and Buttermere Lakes by Turner. It's one that was produced in his studio, but from a number of sketches made on site during his first tour of the Lake District. And you can see the emerging style and confidence of the English picturesque movement in that picture. And by the time Turner was really well established in the early 19th century, he was banging out pictures like this. And this is a big deal in terms of picturesque art. It just knocks you off your feet. If you want a painting to make you feel, then this is the one, isn't it? Because you are literally, you look at this and you are petrified for those people who've got to go across that narrow precipice bridge. Is that storm going to tumble down from the Alps and sweep them off? Is that surge of water, you can hear it tumbling, is it going to come up and take the bridge from under their feet? It's an absolute tour de force of emotion. And for Turner to be going into the heart of the European Alps, that center of classical landscape art, and knocking out paintings like this really does highlight how important and how confident the picturesque movement was at this time. So the picturesque gave people in this country and around the globe a language to talk in experiential and sensory terms about landscape art. And the place where it reached its zenith was the Lake District. That's why it's part of our outstanding universal value. But the picturesque didn't just give people a license to paint and to feel and to build a connection with landscapes. It also gave them a license to travel, because these ideas coincided with French wars. Travel abroad and to the continent was tricky. People were touring inside the UK, and the picturesque, which was born of this new fascination of the English landscapes, UK landscapes, gave people a reason to travel. Unlike, of course, in Defoe's time. So people were now coming to the lakes to do the picturesque tour, and they were guided from place to place by the early tourism pioneers like Thomas West, who published his first Guide to the Lakes in 1778. He told you where to go, in which order to go, and exactly where to stand, even which direction to look. Any fool could go traveling now. And it led to the Lake District becoming an early tourism hotspot destination. And you get early tourism paraphernalia. This is one of Joseph Crosthwaite's famous maps produced from his museum in Keswick to guide tourists around. And you also see a little reconstruction there of Clave Station, a pleasure house designed to give people a picturesque experience by looking at landscape through tinted windows to affect different views and affect the different seasons and different types of weather. So this landscape, product of industry and of farming, it inspires the picturesque, it influences early tourism, but it also does something else. It is the cradle of romanticism. It is the landscape where this notion of romanticism takes root and flourishes. And how does the picturesque and romanticism, how do they interrelate? Well, just as the picturesque marked a shift from objective seeing to subjective seeing, and how things make you feel, romanticism, it emphasizes the importance of the role of the individual. It says here, inspired by the emotive power of the imagination, perceive the world through their own senses. People are making sense of their environment through their own eyes, through their own heart. It is the romantic's feeling towards nature that determines their experience of it. There we are. That's the best definition of romanticism that I could find. Where does this idea come from? Well, it's got some very deep roots. Of course, part of it originates in pre-revolutionary France and the writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. who establishes what we might call today this idea of free will, and challenges this idea that our lives and everything we do is predetermined by some sort of divine order. He sets up this idea that we are in control of our own destiny, and that if a chambermaid wants to rise to become the mistress of the house, then God and no one else can stop her. Big idea, particularly if you're at the top of that social tree and used to having everything your own way, and particularly as the new working classes brought into the cities by the Industrial Revolution are living out their lives in scenes like this. This difference between the have and the have-nots becomes ever so marked. And the fact that Rousseau is saying to people, well, you can do what you want, no one's stopping you, is obviously one of the causes of the French Revolution. And it's hard to overestimate the shock that Europe experienced after 1750, 1770 as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution and the advent of industrial capital. The world is turned upside down. All sorts of social orders are broken apart, and it is a time of immense change. And Romanticism is a key part of that, and it puts the individual at the heart of their own destiny. And the way that that was expressed in art and literature comes through in things like Les Mis and other works of that time, but also in art. And this is perhaps the quintessential starting point for an understanding of romantic art. It's by Caspar David Friedrich. It's of a Prussian soldier, and critically, he's got his back to us. We don't know who he is. There's a lot of mystery. He doesn't know what he's looking into because the landscape is shrouded by low cloud and mist. For him, the future is uncertain. And he is absolutely in the center of that portrait, a position up until that time reserved for crucifixion scenes. And the exchange of Christ on the cross for somebody looking into the future is just heretical. And you can see how the artist has brought all those diagonal lines from the mountains, the clouds, the precipice upon which he stands, all coming straight into him. He is at the center of his universe. And this is so important in understanding about Romanticism. It's giving people control of their own destiny. And of course, somebody who saw the tail end of that French Revolution, who landed in Calais on the first anniversary of the French Revolution, was William Wordsworth. And his time in France is really fascinating. If you don't know that story of what he got up to, then it's well worth hunting down an account or a podcast to fill in that gap. But for the sake of this story, Wordsworth's part in it begins in 1799 as Wordsworth arrives in Grasmere. His ideas and his work have at their heart this powerful idea of experience, human experience of the individual being really important to formative for people's character and the production of memory and self-discovery. And having seen the revolution and that aspirational quality within people, but then seeing it fail, Wordsworth set about looking for a revolution, not on the streets, but in the mind, what he called a revolution of ideas, to try and find a better way of living that was an antidote to life in the cities, to life in industrial Manchester, and this chewing up of people that industrial capitalism was beginning to do in the towns and the cities. And the place he chose to try and find that better way of living was the Lake District. It became for him a critical landscape where he could look for what was good about people. People in their relationship with nature, people in their relationship with each other. And Wordsworth was not alone in this. He obviously had a very close relationship with Coleridge, and Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and the needless slaying of the albatross is interpreted as perhaps the earliest expression of what we might call modern environmentalism. And that desire to live in harmony with nature and the wider world is certainly part of Romanticism. Grasmere, which contains, I think, 3 different homes of Wordsworth, became known as the cradle of Romanticism, and the landscape there, including Grasmere Island, became really central to his writings. So any exploration of the landscape today, you can see and understand those landscapes that Wordsworth looked upon, the places he visited, and have a direct physical link and experience similar to the one that Wordsworth had. And it's this idea that we still have landscapes that inspired the picturesque, that inspired Romanticism, that is really central to the Lake District's significance. Now, very quickly, the third and final pillar of our outstanding universal value. We've got our landscape shaped by industry and farming. It's inspired the picturesque movement. It's inspired the romantic movement. It has changed European philosophy and art. Now we need a system to look after it. And that's what we're going to be talking about in theme 3. This landscape that has been a catalyst for the key developments in national and international protection of landscapes. So, as early as people have been coming to the Lake District to enjoy their early tourism experiences, to enjoy those picturesque scenes, there's been a concern that we need to look after it. This painting is an exaggerated view of Derwent Water from Crow Park, made just from alongside where the theatre by the lake now stands, was made to illustrate and in response a story in the Times, which was public criticism of a private estate for felling oak trees, a woodland on the side of Derwent Water.
Little trees along the road might have great importance.
And if you can see, you can actually see the stumps of those trees in the bottom of the print. And this was the first time, the first example, that there had been popular, public outcry and criticism about the land management of a private individual. Until then, it had been no one else's business. But now, the Lake District, oh, it's special, it's beautiful, it's scenery. You can't go felling trees. And they were criticized. And there was a concern. There was what you might describe the rise of a landscape aesthetic concern for it. Because as people came to enjoy the Lake District from the 1770s onwards, people began to want to stay there. Those people who'd built their mills in Manchester and Leeds started to build their villas on the islands and the promontories around the lakes. The thing that everybody loved started to be changed by the presence of the tourists. And we can see that concern about a handful of villas scattered here and there begin to grow, because now we've got industrialists like the Marshall family, flax spinners of Leeds, who are buying up whole valley heads. They're buying estates for each of their sons, and each son is transforming their area. This is one of the areas they transformed is Tarn House, celebrated today but enormously controversial at the time for the degree of change that was being affected in the landscape. So who was going to express a concern about the speed of change and the vulnerability of the Lake District to all of this interest? Well, it's Wordsworth. Who else? The voice, the authoritative voice of the new Romantic age. He was pivotal in this debate, and his guide to the lakes of 1810 uses the word Lake District for the first time. Before then, it was known as the lakes of Cumberland and Westmoreland. The Lake District didn't exist until 1810. And he also conjured up this idea of the lakes being a sort of national property, free for every person with an eye to see and a heart to enjoy. Sort of national property. Interesting idea. And Wordsworth also introduced this notion of an economy of nature in one of his later guides to the Lake District in 1835, where he sets out almost a covenant, the terms of a harmonious relationship between humans and nature, organized through formal protection of landscapes. And these concepts were embryonic in what we might think of as the National Trust and the National Park movement. And that baton was passed from Wordsworth to Ruskin, who from his study overlooking Coniston took it to the next level. He started to actually define the modern framework for landscape conservation philosophy. Wordsworth established that it needed to be looked after. Ruskin started to define how, in detail, we might do it. And as the 18th century gave way to the 19th century, we weren't just seeing odd, wealthy mill owners coming up to visit their villas. We're in the age of the paddle steamer and the railway. We're getting mass tourism. There are thousands of people coming to the Lake District. How do we now manage this landscape under growing acute pressure? The villa builders were still there, but the very landscape is under threat. The traditional way of life of the dalesman farmer was under siege. The response to that increased scale of threat was what we refer to as an innovative conservation community. They needed to get to grips with some big issues: reservoir building, the flooding of valleys, conifer plantations in the Central Fells, things that were going to change the character of the whole Lake District. And of course, we weren't a national park back then. There was no national trust. What did people do to express a concern for these changes? Well, people like Karen Rawnsley, H.H. and other members of that innovative conservation community started to come together to form societies like the Thirlmere Defence Society. And while they were ultimately unsuccessful in preventing the reservoir being built and Thirlmere being flooding, the lessons they learned allowed them to fight the next battle from a much stronger point of view. And Rawnsley, who'd been involved in the Thirlmere Defence Society, he was living at Allen Bank, which, if you look in this photograph here, is that little white house floating to the left above Grasmere Island. He was living there and looks out onto the island, which was up for sale in 1893. And he wrote in his diary, it's a great pity that there's not some sort of national body that could be set up to receive donations of land, make purchases, and hold that land in trust on behalf of the nation. It was the purchase of Grasmere Island that sowed that seed in his mind. Just 2 years later, the National Trust was formed as a subscription organisation that could receive funding from individuals, acquire places, and then hold it on behalf of the nation. And we acquired Brandlhow, our first property in the Lake District, just a couple of years later. You can see that photograph there from the Times outlining that very first acquisition. And from those humble beginnings, the National Trust, the Lake District in the UK, has blossomed to become an international body. There's now a whole worldwide family of international national trusts managing landscapes through a subscription donation model in over 60 countries. So it's had global influence. The battle for Thirlmere and numerous other conservation battles also encouraged thought about how landscapes could be managed and preserved by governments, by countries. And that inspired the development of the early national park movement. And the Lake District was the second national park to be designated in the UK in 1951. But we were quite late to the game. Places like the US, South Africa, places that had these huge wilderness landscapes, they'd been designating national parks since 1872. And John Muir, who famously went on a 3-day camping trip over in Yosemite National Park with then President Roosevelt in 1903, convinced him on that 3-night stay that it was the job of federal government to protect these very special landscapes and to declare them national parks. South Africa took a very similar route, and the ideas took root in the Lake District. They borrowed the thinking of Ruskin and Wordsworth. So it is those three themes, the landscape shaped by farming and industry, its inspirational quality for art and literature, and its formative quality in establishing the international National Trust movement and national park movement that are recognised in the inscription of the Lake District as a World Heritage Site. As a lot crammed in a small area. Now, my last couple of slides are just going to finish off by saying how we hope to manage this very special place. And that's through something called the Partnership Plan and the Lake District National Park Partnership. Thankfully, no single organisation has responsibility for managing the World Heritage Site. That responsibility is shared by a partnership which is led by the Lake District National Park Authority, but is a very active coalition of the willing, all trying to uphold the partnership vision to maintain and sustain the national park's special qualities and its World Heritage outstanding universal value. While the National Park Authority leads on the partnership and takes decisions and through local planning policy, there are various decision-making forums and technical advice forums that support that process of decision-making. And overarching that, providing support and oversight of various local, national and international bodies. The holder for World Heritage qualifier in the UK is Historic England. They're part of the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. They have open conversations with ICOMOS, a cultural heritage organisation based in Paris that provides technical support to UNESCO and their World Heritage Centre. So you can see how there's a chain of command, so to speak. Perfect timing. That was my last slide, just as my voice begins to get croaky. So I hope there I've given you at a canter a description of why the Lake District is so very special, why it can take its place amongst the 1,100 most special places on the planet, and offer some reassurance that those special qualities will be looked after in the decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jamie. A small round of applause from our, our isolated seats. Can I just ask a question first of all, and then open the floor to others who may wish to debate? It's a brilliant history of the movement over the last several hundred years. And you put quite a lot of focus on individuals who were key players in that movement. And I'm going to ask you a rather difficult question. Who is the person today that is most respected and can really give a lead on keeping that conservation movement moving within the Lake District? Because the sense for many people who are working on conservation issues is that it's a movement which is a little bit leadership less, that there are too many conflicting people around, and that there isn't a sense of a common vision forward. Do you think in the present time there are one or two people who are key figures who have the responsibility and the support of the government and the non-government organizations to keep that flag flying for the future?
They're closing on Saturday. Not completely closing.
Apparently. So if you want something from Raven, tell me to get it.
I don't know whether you heard that, Jamie. We have some background noise, but Jamie, did you hear that comment?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry, Tim.
We're having a few technical issues. Sorry about that.
I'll try again. I think it's a good question. I'm going to give you a politician's answer, but it is also the answer that comes from the heart, that I believe. And I think it is sometimes too easy, too tempting, when things aren't as you would like them, to look around for the superhuman inspirational leader who can lead you from where you are to where you want to get to. But I think those people are very few and far between. And of course, if they don't happen to see the world as you do or champion your values, that can be very frustrating. So I do honestly believe that one of the strengths of leadership and management in the Lake District is that there are no individuals leading it, and that the Lake District Partnership, which is this conglomeration of organisations spearheaded by the Lake District National Park Authority, is our genuine best bet to sustain, protect and manage the Lake District, its landscape, its communities, its businesses, its environment into the future. I honestly look around and I can't see a better model. And having looked at how other World Heritage sites, other national parks, how other protected landscapes are managed around the globe, partnership model seems to be the one that delivers the best results across the sample that I've looked at.
Okay. Just a few words. Jamie, would you mind stop screen sharing? So that would allow us to see everyone on our own screens. And could I ask people if they want to speak to unmute themselves? Now I see, who do I see who wanted to speak? Mike Parsons, do you want to ask a question?
Jamie, you're fine. It's not sharing anymore.
Good, fabulous.
Okay. Mike Parsons, I saw your hand raised. No. Seem to have some technical issues. Does anyone else then wish to make a question?
Oh, go on, don't be
because
shy.
there seem to be some technical issues on the call. Some people say we can't hear each other. Can everyone hear me? Yes, they can.
Mike,
Mike Parsons, you wanted to raise a question.
go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I see David Harrison's hand up. David, would you
Oh,
like to
can you hear
speak?
me? I can't hear anything. You're muted. I can't hear anything at all.
Can we pass to David? David, can you ask your question?
Can I ask you a question, Jamie? It's obviously quite quite complicated and detailed procedure to be inscribed. How easy or difficult it is to be unsubscribed?
Good question. Well, there's only one person we can ask, because only ever one World Heritage Site has been uninscribed, and that happened in the 1980s. City of Dresden was uninscribed. UNESCO did not like their proposal for a new bridge that was going to have, in its view, an adverse impact upon the architecture, the medieval surviving architecture of Dresden, and it was removed from the World Heritage list. Now, I think, from what I've heard, UNESCO regret doing that, because once you've excluded somebody from the list, the conversation ends, and they are much more inclined now to engage in dialogue with people to try and rescue the situation and bring them back into the World Heritage fold. So what tends to happen is that every 4 years, you are invited to give a description of how your outstanding universal value, how it is, what condition it's in. If UNESCO are concerned, they might come and check for themselves, and if they're very worried, they might put you on the World Heritage at Risk list. And any government worth its salt would be embarrassed by that, and will try and take remedial action. So there is, I think UNESCO kind of rely on shame factor to keep people off the World Heritage Site list. And of course, it's a great warning when there are conflicts like we saw in the Middle East, with the rise of the Islamic State, a whole suite of World Heritage Sites lit up as being at risk, and that triggered international help. So it can be useful, but yes, it's not easy to get booted off, from what I understand.
No, from what you're saying, the at-risk category sounds a very useful tool. Yeah, that's quite reassuring. Thank you.
I'm going to try Mike Parsons again. Your hand is still up.
Well, thanks, Tim. Thank you, Jamie, for a very interesting talk. I've always recognized the importance of WHO, but in a world which has doubled in population since 1980 to 7 billion and is due to grow to 9 billion in the next few years, I have a growing feeling that anything which publicizes important landscape and cultural areas is actually negative. And so therefore I take a negative view of the Lake District being WHO recognized, because I haven't yet had any explanation as to its benefits for the Lake District other than promoting more people to tread on the ground. Could I have your comments, please?
Yeah, it's a really good challenge, Mike, and I know that question was asked again and again during the period prior to inscription. It was something that was raised by local authorities, many of the partners, and many community groups. There was a technical and economic appraisal that tried to forecast what sort of upturn in visitor numbers we might see, a consequence of being on the back of being a World Heritage Site. And it is true, there is a high-end segment of international tourists who are World Heritage Site baggers. And it does bring in a certain crowd, but they are some of the sort of uber ultra high spend net worth individuals, and they were seen as delivering money for the local economy. at minimal additional footfall. So I think what we're seeing at the moment, and I think the forecast that is incredible for future visits to the Lake District, is not so much a product of inscription as a World Heritage Site. Sadly, I feel the majority of visitors don't know that it is or what it means. I think the rise in visitor numbers is the fact that there is an increasing interest in people getting out into the countryside for the mental health benefits that it brings, for the experiences that are on offer, and for the antidote that it is to the ills of modern life. I think the process has been ongoing since the sort of advent of the Victorian parks and the creation of the first sort of inner city green spaces. And the fact that our population is exploding does take that up to a new level, Mike. And I too am concerned that places like Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, the Lake District, our visitor numbers may become unsustainable pretty quickly. I think we do need to tackle that and recognise it, but I don't see World Heritage status as a cause of it. I feel, if anything, it's a useful tool to have a purely independent, dispassionate, international voice that can look entirely objectively and say, you've got so many visitors, they are destroying the essence of what's special about you. They're destroying the thing they're coming to see. So the fact that we've got that external check and balance in place, I can only see as being a good thing.
Okay, are there any other questions from the audience? We can probably go on for another 5-10 minutes if that's all right with everyone.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I see Brian.
First of all, Jamie, a fantastic tour de force and a great antidote to COVID. So thank you very much indeed. I was interested in your quotation from Wordsworth, harmonious relationship between humans and nature. Two things come to mind. One is the kind of social cultural change. I remember 76 years ago at Matterdale School being caned for running up the steps and having 6 stitches, which obviously wouldn't have fed into the rationale for, cultural involvement in a National Heritage Site. But more importantly, we used to go down to Air Force and it was quiet, it was mysterious, it was magical, it was remote. And it was absolutely a fantastic experience that even after this time, I remember. Now you go there, it's managed, there are so many people, the pathways are being developed. I don't go fishing for sea trout any longer, trying to get up Air Force to Dockeray because that's all changed. How do you actually balance trying to keep something which is so important and beautiful, which is now radically changed, to cope with the tourists and the income generation it gives to the National Trust, with something that is being radically changed as a result of you having to cope with that number of tourists? It seems to me that this is an inherent problem for the National Trust about balancing between what people actually come to see by the value of nature and the fact that it's being destroyed partly by some of your actions.
Oh, well, good Lord, Brian. Another brilliant question, and you're absolutely right. It is an established problem for anyone working in conservation, is you want people to access and enjoy the asset because it gives it value in experiential terms. And if people see it and enjoy it, they're more likely to be willing to help conserve it, whether it's by picking up their own litter or paying for national parks through their taxes. But there comes a point where access enjoyment, well-meaning though it is, turns into mass tourism. And exactly how many visitors you can allow to enjoy the thing, whatever it is, without it losing its integrity or its authenticity without it losing all meaning is a moot point. And that is what I do for a living, Brian. That is my job, and the job of the National Trust curators is to try and work with the ranger teams to strike that right balance between looking after place but facilitating enjoyment. And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, and it needs to be turned up or turned down. Air Force is a great example. It's a really challenging place to bring 200,000 people a year through, because it's narrow, it's in a ravine, and the paths are windy. It's not like trying to get 200,000 people down Oxford Street. So it is a challenging environment, but that is not an excuse for failure. If it isn't working at present, we need to be made aware of that and make changes. So it's brilliant to have feedback from individuals. It's better to have feedback from groups, which is a kind of tacit invitation. And it's also even better to have feedback that is very precise and saying, if you don't think it's working, exactly what is it that's not working? Can something be done with the surfacing? Can something be done with infrastructure, with vegetation to, try and remedy what the problems are? So it is a real problem, Brian. And, we can scale this up as well. We can look at it on a micro level at Air Force. We can look at it at the macro level as well and say, how on earth are we going to get 21 million visitors through the Lake District a year? We can look at it at that scale. It's frightening.
Does anyone else have another question for Jamie? I mean, I'm happy to lob in another one, and then I'll bring the thing to a close. My question again is a little bit of a tough one for you, maybe. In the latest consultation plan, I think the partners came out with a proposal for 5 different challenges. I mean, if you were running the system, if you were the chair of the partnership, what for you is the #1 key priority, which we have to get right in order to keep the Lake District in the condition that we all hope it will be kept in for the next 30, 100 years, whatever?
There's 2 that I would say are neck and neck and intertwined. They can't be separated. First of all, is that 5-year farming and farming families are going to go through a fundamental agricultural transition period. And there is great uncertainty about how that's going to work, how many farm businesses are going to fare. And farming culture, farming landscapes are absolutely critical to the Lake District in terms of its special qualities, its national park status, and its World Heritage Site status. So I want to emerge through that agricultural transition period with the same number of farming families in the Lake District that we have now, and those farming families being in a better place economically, financially, environmentally, and in terms of their sense of value and what they give to the Lake District, because I think they're fundamental. I think they are the bedrock upon what everything else rests. The other thing is that it would be ludicrous to say that there isn't a crisis of nature and that there isn't a climate crisis. So going back to Brian's trout in Air Force, I want those trout back, and I want everything else that we've lost from the land and the lakes and the skies to be back for my kids to enjoy, and certainly for their grandchildren to enjoy. So we've lost so much within our lifetimes. We've lost so much from the lifetime of our parents that I think trying to bring that back in a way that restocks nature in the Lake District without pushing out farmers, but finding that harmonious balance that Wordsworth might have appreciated is the single biggest challenge that we have to get to grips with.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie. I just want to make 3 very brief points and then we will close. The first one is, it's our tradition that we try to allocate any resources that comes from these lectures or presentations to the charity organization of choice of the speaker. So 50% of any proceeds will go to the Friends of the Ullswater Way and 50% to something. Jamie, would you like to sort of give an indication of how you would like any contributions to be allocated?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I had to think about this, and the National Trust over the next couple of years will be taking seed that it is collected from crabapple trees in Garbarrow Park in Ullswater and regrowing on crabapple trees from local provenance. So we won't be bringing trees in from outside, and we'll be replanting crabapple trees in cages to get the next generation of crabapple trees established in Garbarrow Park. So that's what I'm going to nominate.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a great idea. The second thing I wanted to say is that just to say that our next talk is going to be given by Eleanor Kingston, who is the lead strategy advisor on historic environment for the Lake District National Park Authority. She was awarded in 2019 the Community Archaeologist of the Year award. She's extremely well respected, and she's going to talk about the archaeology of Ullswater. So that's our next talk. It's on the 1st of July, so the same principle, the first Thursday of every month, 1st of July at 7:30. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is that I was very struck by one of your quotes, Jamie. You said, you're looking for a cultural landscape that can be read like a book and that we should be encouraged to decipher its meaning. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in a new website that we developed in Friends of the Ullswater Way, something called ullswaterheritage.org. And we will encourage you all. It's brand new, hot off the shelf, just started, and we're looking for contributions and comments. So maybe when I write a little note after this meeting, I'll advertise it for listeners, and I would strongly recommend you look at it, because the whole idea behind this new heritage site is to do exactly that, to try to provoke us all when we're looking at a landscape to try to decipher it and understand its history and its future. So with those 3 words, thank you very much to you all for listening. Maybe we could all unmute and we can all applaud Jamie's wonderful talk tonight. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you very much indeed for coming, and may see some of you again on the 1st of July. Thank you.
Thank you.